welcome to Nailing It Down, a product of Barnblog. And we continue with our discussion of the critique of the Gotha program to a section that I don't see referenced that much. But we will talk about it because it has some pretty deep implications, I think. This is section 3 of the draft notes. Remember, go back to this was the draft notes on the Gotha program, which was his critique of it. Largely seems to think we overstate this importance. Lenin seems to think it's crucial to the entire perspective of communism. We'll get to that in our after the actual text episodes, but let's go back into the text itself. This is from the Gotha program. The German Workers' Party, in order to pave the way to the solution of the social question, demands the establishment of producers' cooperative societies with state aid under democratic control of the toiling people. The producers' cooperative societies are to be called into being for industry and agriculture on such a scale that the socialist organization of total labor will arise from them. Now, I say this because I know some people who advocate socialism, and a friend of the show, Ben Burgess, actually has been working on a book of Bhaskar Kansara that kind of sounds like what this is talking about, which is state-aided workers' cooperatives that are aided by the state, deciding who gets the seed surplus to start a workers' cooperative, and that's funded by a progressive income tax, etc. I don't think you can support that from this text. After the Lassallean iron law of wages, the physics of the profit, the way to it is paved in a worthy fashion. In place of the existing class struggle appears a newspaper scribbler's phrase, the social question, to the solution of one which paves the way. This is Warren talking. You can see Marx is very disgusted with the softening of this language. There's a lot here. Instead of arising from a revolutionary process of transforming of society, the, quote, socialist organization of total labor arises from state aid that the state gives to producers' cooperative societies, which the state, not the workers, cause into being. It is worthy of Lassalle's imagination that the state loans one can build a new society just as well as a new railroad. It is worthy of Lassalle's imagination that with state loans one can build a new society just as well as a new railway. Lassalle is a precursor of chartalism, which is a precursor of neo-chartalism and MMT. I pointed out that while there's parts of MMT that Marxists can use, its state-centric viewpoint is directly refuted by Marx. And modern Marxists who deny this don't understand this, and they don't understand Lenin either. And if they are correcting it, they're correcting what Marx thought was crucial out of Marxism. This is what I mean when I call people Lassalleans as an insult. Right? The reason why it's a problem is state implies class. Lenin's clearing this as state and revolution. And also a new society being built just by loans, just by creating liquidity to build infrastructure. You know, for Marx, like that's not good enough. That doesn't really establish who's in charge of all these social mechanisms. And just putting in the state doesn't mean the people are actually in charge of it at all. In the first place, the majority of toiling people in Germany consist of peasants, not proletarians. Marx realizes the problem in his time that the majority of the population is not proletarian. So people who think this is the problem for Marxism, they need to read this text. Peasants were not supposed to be excluded. Remember, he also said you can't treat peasants as one reactionary mass. But if you were just to put it in control of everything, the peasants are in control of this, not proles, at least in this time period. Second, democratic means in the German Volksherrschaftlich, by the rule of the people. But what does control by the rule of the people of the toiling people mean? And particularly in the case of toiling people, which, through these demands that it puts on the state, express their full consciousness and neither rules nor its right for ruling. And he's here talking about the peasants. It will be superfluous here to deal with the criticism of the recipes described by Bush in the reign of Louis Philippe, in opposition to the French socialists, accepted by the reactionary workers of Atelier. The chief offense does not lie in having inscribed the specific nostrum in this program, but in taking in general a retrograde step from the standpoint of class movement to that of a sectarian movement. So from the movement of a class to a movement of a pre-described ideology, to which you have an answer to a social question. This hits a lot of Marxists in the gut, and it should, because most of us end up from the retrograde step of a class movement to that of a sectarian movement. The workers' desire to establish the conditions for cooperative production on a social scale, and first of all on a national scale in their own country, only means they are working to revolutionize the present conditions of production. And it has nothing in common with the foundation of cooperative societies with state aid. I'm going to read this again because most Marxists today do not understand this, or they have rejected it without admitting it. The workers' desire to establish conditions for cooperative production on a social scale, and first of all on a national scale in their own country, only means they are working to revolutionize the present conditions of production, and it has nothing in common with the foundation of cooperative societies with state aid. Meaning, the seizure of the state and the national scale for most European nations is because it is an efficient way to actually organize production. It is not because one used to use the state to create state aid to maintain that organization. But as far as the present cooperative societies are concerned, they are of value only insofar that they are independent creations of the workers and not proteges of either the government or of the bourgeoisie. I'm going to repeat that one too. But as far as the present cooperative societies are concerned, they are of value only insofar that they are independent creations of the workers and not proteges of either the governments or of the bourgeoisie. I'm sorry, my friends. This is a direct rebuttal to those of you who like Richard Wolff's cooperative transitions, because this is aimed squarely at that, squarely at money schemes as a way to do that. It's explicit in the text. And people who want to diminish the importance of the critique of the Gotha program often do so because these are the kinds of things that hit contemporary Marxists directly in the gut, because they have abandoned this. They only refer to parts of the Gotha program, which they can use to either justify continuing capitalist relations, although, as I pointed out in my discussion on the second half of section 1, it's pretty clear that that's not what Marx meant, or to have a very workers' point of view, or to talk about stages of socialism and communism, because there are no such stages in Marx in general. This is the only place where you find them. We'll continue on to section 4. Now to the democratic section. A free basis of the state. First of all, according to section 2, the German Workers' Party strives for the free state. Free state? What is this? It is by no means the aims of the workers, who got rid of the narrow mentality of humble subjects, to set the state free. In the German Empire, the state is almost as free as in Russia. Freedom consists in converting the state from an organ superimposed upon society into one completely subordinate to it. And today, too, the forms of the state are more free or less free to the extent that they restrict the freedom of the state. The German Workers' Party, at least if it adopts the program, shows that the socialist ideas are not even skin deep. In that, instead of treating existing society and this holds good for any future one, as the basis of the existing state, or of a future state in the case of a future society. It treats the state rather as an independent entity that possesses its own intellectual, ethical, and libertarian basis. In Varn's terms, it reifies the state as a subject. The state should never be your subject. Back to Marx. And what riotous misuse of which the program makes of the word present day state, present day society, and the still more riotous misconception it creates in regards to the state to which it addresses its demands. Present day society is capitalist society, which exists in all civilized countries, more or less free from medieval admixture. I disagree with that, the time period Marx is writing, but it's true now. More or less modified by a particular historical development of each country, more or less developed. On the other hand, the present day state changes with a country's frontier. It is different in the Prusso-German Empire from what it is in Switzerland, and different in England from what it is in the United States. The present day state is therefore a fiction. Nevertheless, the different states of different civilized countries, in spite of their monthly diversity of forms, all have this in common. They are based on modern bourgeois society. Only one are more or less capitalistically developed. I think this is where the distinction Platypus get between bourgeois society and capitalism may come from, by the way. I've never heard them justify it other than say it outright, but this would make sense with how you might get that. Anyway, back to this. They have therefore also certain essential characteristics in common. In this sense, it is possible to speak of its present day state in contrast with the future, which at its root is bourgeois society, will have died off. The question then arises, what transformation will the state undergo in communist society? In other words, what social functions will remain in existence that are analogous to the present day state functions? This question can only be answered scientifically, and one does not get to flea hop nearer to the problem by a thousand-fold combination of the words people and the word state. Ouch. How many times have you heard people state used in communist stuff? Kind of funny when you think about it, when you read this. But between capitalist and communist society, there lies a period of revolutionary transformation of one into the other. Correspondingly, this is a political transition period which the state can be nothing but a revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, the program does not deal with this nor any of the future communist societies. Remember, I would see Hal Draper's book on the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat from Marx to Lenin for understanding what Marx meant by this, as different from what, say, Blanqui meant by this. Its political demands contain nothing beyond the old democratic litany familiar to all. Universal suffrage, direct legislation, popular rights, the people's militia, etc. They are the mere echoes of the People's Party and the League of Peaceful Freedom. Asterisk, remember, those are the bourgeois parties we already talked about. They are all demands which, insofar that they are not exaggerated in fantastic presentation, have already been realized. Only the state to which they belong does not lie within the borders of the German Empire, but in Switzerland, the United States, etc. This sort of state of the future is a present-day state, existing just outside the framework of the German Empire. But one thing has been forgotten. Since the German Workers' Party explicitly declares it acts with the present-day national state, hence within its own state, the Prusso-German Empire, its demands would be otherwise largely meaningless, since one only demands what one has not got. It should not be forgotten the chief thing, namely, that all those pretty little gewgaws rest on the recognition of the so-called sovereignty of the people, and hence are appropriate only in a democratic republic. Asking for them from the German Empire doesn't make sense for Marx, because it's not a democratic republic. Since one has not the courage, and wisely so, for the circumstances demand caution, to demand the democratic republic. He's talking about what Bismarck would do if he did that, such as the French workers' program under Louis Philippe and under Louis Napoleon did. One should not have resorted either to subterfuge, neither honest nor decent, of demanding things which only have meaning in a democratic republic from a state which is nothing but a police guard of military despotism, embellished with the parliamentary forms, alloyed with feudal admixture, already influenced by the bourgeoisie and bureaucratically carpeted, and then to assure the state into the bargain that one imagines will be able to force such things upon it by, quote, legal means, unquote. Even vulgar democracy, which sees the millennium in the democratic republic and has no suspicion that it's precisely this last form of the bourgeois society, the class struggle has to be fought out to a conclusion, even it towers mountains above this kind of democratism, which keeps within its limits what is permitted by the police and not permitted by logic. Ouch. That, in fact, by the word state, is meant the government machine, or the state insofar as it forms a special organism separated from society through divisions of labor, is shown by the words the German Workers' Party demands the economic basis of the state, a single progressive income tax. Taxes are the economic basis of a government machinery and of nothing else. In the state of the future existing in Switzerland, this demand has been pretty well fulfilled. Income taxes presuppose various sources of income from which social classes and hence capitalist society. It is therefore nothing remarkable that the Liverpool finance reformers, bourgeois headed by Gladstone's brother, are put forward the same demands as the program. AKA, look, the bourgeoisie want progressive income taxes too because it increases parts of their base. If you make the state dependent on income taxes, it's dependent on profits, which means that your social welfare state is dependent on the profits of the capitalist society. Marx sees this early, and yet we forgot it through most of the 20th century, people. B. The German Workers' Party demands, as the intellectual and ethical basis of the state, the universal and equal elementary education by the state, universally compulsory school attendance, free instruction. I'm going to say this, most communists agree with this. I have actually argued that Marxists don't believe in strong state education, but state-funded education, which is a different thing. And I'll get into that in a minute. But this, I think, will surprise a whole lot of people. I've made a lot of hay out of this because a teacher pointing out that Marx is somewhat ambivalent about public schools as long as public schools have a state-funded curriculum. The state-funded and state-supplied and state-controlled. All right. Equal elementary education. What idea lies behind these words? Is it to be believed that in present-day society, and it is the only one which one, and it is only this one has to deal, and it's only with this one has to deal. I like this translation. It's only with this one has to deal. Education can be equal for all classes. Ouch. Universal education won't equalize education, which Marx is saying, particularly if it's provided by the state. Or is this demanded that the German upper classes also shall be compulsory reduced to the modicum of education, the elementary school that is alone compatible with the economic conditions, not only of the wage worker, but of peasants as well? Ouch. Do you really, Marx is saying here, do you really think you can equalize things unless you force the bourgeoisie not to educate their children more than this? And do you really think that's going to work? Do you really think they'll ever accept that? Universal compulsory school attendance, free instruction. The former exists even in Germany. The second in Switzerland and in the United States in the case of elementary schools. If in some states of the latter country higher education institutions are also free, that only means that, in fact, defraying the cost of education with the upper classes from the general tax receipts. We're just going to point this out because I've pointed this out, in fact, before too. When you provide free education of the elite and you haven't in college, but you haven't provided good educational basis for everybody, what you're really doing is subsidizing upper middle class families' education of their kids. Free universal higher education only makes sense if you have good free universal education in general, and that there's some freedom in the education, and we'll get to that in a minute. Incidentally, the same holds good for free administration of justice demanded under A5. The administration of criminal justice is to be free everywhere. That is, civil justice is concerned exclusively with conflicts over property and hence affects almost exclusively the possessing classes. Are they the carry? Or in their litigation at the expense of the national coffers? This paragraph on schools should at least have demanded technical schools, theoretical and practical, in combination with elementary schools. I agree with that. In fact, one of the things I think we should be talking about is the reestablishment of good vocational education. I'm not a progressive educator. I hate John Dewey. I want people to know that. I'm going to talk about that in the future for the public, and I'm definitely going to talk to my patrons about it soon. But the gutting of vocational training and outsourcing it to private institutions that students have to pay exorbitant amounts of money to is bad. All right. Elementary education by the state is altogether objectionable. Defining by general law the expenditures of elementary schools, the qualifications of teaching staff, the branches of instruction, etc., as is done in the United States, supervising the fulfillment of these by legal specifications by state inspectors is a very different thing from appointing the state as educator of the people. Meaning, like, it's fine for us to say the state's going to fund education, but if we say the state's going to provide it, the state's going to control what it's providing too, isn't it? Is it really going to be in your interest since you don't actually control said state? That's what Marx is implying here. You should think about that when you deal with public education in the United States. Now, you shouldn't fund public education, but these people who want to make it dependent on the political structures of the feds maybe should think about what that would actually mean, given who normally controls federal government. Marx actually thinks the diffuse nature of education in the United States isn't a bad thing. Now, you may disagree with that, but that is what this text says. Particularly and indeed in the Prusso-German Empire, and one should not take refuge in the rotten subterfuge that one is speaking of a state of the future. We have seen how matters stand in this respect. The state has need, on the contrary, of a very stern education by the people. But the whole program, for all its democratic clawing, is tainted through and through by the Lassallean sect's servile belief in the state, or, what is no better, by the democratic belief in miracles, or rather the compromise between these two kinds of beliefs in miracles, both equally remote from socialism. Cough, cough. Freedom of science, says a paragraph of the Prussian Constitution. Why then here? Freedom of conscience. If one desired, at the same time of Kontrakampf, to demand liberalism of its own catchwords, it surely could have been done only in the following form. Everyone should be able to attend his religious as well as his bodily needs without the police striking their noses in it. But the Workers' Party ought, at any rate in this connection, have expressed its awareness of the fact that the bourgeois freedom of conscience is nothing but the toleration of all possible kinds of religious freedom of conscience, and that for its part in its endeavors rather to liberate the conscience from the rituary of religion, but one chooses to transgress the bourgeois level. And now I come to the end, where the appendix that now follows in the program does not constitute the characteristic component of it. Hence, however, I can be very brief. Appendix. Note 1. Normal working day. In no other country has the Workers' Party limited itself to such an indefinite demand, but has always fixed the length of the working day that it can be considered normal under given circumstances. You got to state what you mean. You can't use words like normal or average without stating what those are. That's what Marx pointed out here. Restriction of female labor and prohibition of child labor. The standardization of the working day must include the restriction of female labor insofar as it relaxes to the duration, intermissions, etc. of the working day. Otherwise, it can only mean the exclusion of female labor from branches of industry that are especially unhealthy for the female body, or objectionably immoral for the female sex. If that is what it meant, it should have said so. Prohibition of child labor Here it is absolutely essential to state the age limit. A general prohibition of child labor is incompatible with the existence of large-scale industry, and hence an empty, pious wish. Its realization, if it were possible, would be reactionary, since the strict regulation of the working time according to different age groups and other satisfactory measures for the protection of children, an early combination of productive labor with education, is one of the most potent parts of the transformation of present-day society. Marx believes that work should be actually included in education. This is part of what it means to be a proletarian laborer. That's pretty removed. But he does think that there should be definitely safety measures put in. He's not denying that. It'd be interesting to know what he meant. It can only mean exclusion of female labor from branches of industry that are especially unhealthy for the female body. So things that would hurt women more than men are objectively moral for the female sex. I don't know what he means by that, and it's hard to know because Marx was a little bit more conservative in gender politics than Engels. But what he says about the restrictions of female labor should just be restrictions of labor in general, such as the duration of one's allowed to labor, intermissions, breaks, etc. So, yeah. So he's kind of saying that you need to state what the restrictions of female labor are and how they're justified, if they're justified. And otherwise, any restriction of female labor should be the same as the restriction on male labor. All right. In consideration of the Prusso-German state, it should definitely have been demanded that the inspectors are to be remotely removable only by court of law, that any worker can be persecuted for the collective duty, that they must belong to the medical profession. All right, let me rephrase that. I didn't read that. The state supervision of the factory, workshop, and domestic industry. In consideration of the Prusso-German state, it should definitely have been demanded that inspectors are to be removable only by court of law, that any worker can have them prosecuted for neglect of duty, and that they must belong to a medical profession. It's basically saying if you're going to have this as a transitory demand, you need to have people qualified in medicine. They need to be able to be punished in court if they are neglectful of actually enforcing safety conditions, and they should only be removable by a court, one specifically run by workers. The regulation of prison labor. A petty demand in the workers' program. In any case, it should have been clearly stated that there is no intention for fear of competition to allow ordinary criminals to be treated like beasts, and especially that there is no desire to deprive them of their sole means of betterment, productive labor. That this was surely at least one might have expected from socialists. Let people sell their work back. Don't deprive felons of the ability to work after they leave prison or even during, and nor should you deny them compensation for that work. You should also protect them from being, quote, treated like beast, unquote. Yeah, so Marx, pretty clear on what he thinks there. That's pretty hard on the Gulag system. All right, 6. An effective liability law. It should have been stated what is meant by effective liability law. Be it noted, incidentally, that in speaking of the normal working day, the part of the factory legislation that deals with health regulations and safety measures has been overlooked. The liability law comes into operation only when these regulations are infringed. In short, this appendix also is disguised by slovenly editing. Dies es salvi, ad mentem meum. I have spoken and saved my soul. And we finish the critique of the Gotha program, sections 3, 4, and appendix. Surprising in some of what it says, I think. Surprising how this text is abused. We'll get into the reception history of this text in the next episode, and we really need to start with its revitalization by Engels and the primacy it's given in State and Revolution by Lenin. Have a great day.